Hey there, it's Awesome Communications. Welcome back to another review. This time of the 2015 horror film, The Inhabitants. Now, The Inhabitants is a film that I only really saw, and I'm only really reviewing it because the directors and also the writers of this film, the Rasmussen brothers, I hope I said it from Rasmussen, or I hope I said their last name correctly. They contacted me directly through my email and asked me if I wanted to give this film a look and review it for them. So I said yes. They sent me a screener copy through, I think it was on Vimeo, and I just got done checking it out, and I only took so long to review it because I've been studying for my math tests and things like that the past week and things like that. And by the way, I got an 85 on it, so it was definitely worth the time studying for it. But so it wasn't until recently, like right now, I just got done watching the movie that I was able to do this review, and this one surprised me. I was expecting to be terrible. I was expecting to be miserable. These are no offense to the Rasmussen brothers personally, because I got to say right off the bat, I'm really grateful for the opportunity to see the film and I'm really honored for them to ask me to review their movie. So, I mean, that alone is enough for me to respect them, whether or not I ended up liking the film or not. But I'm not a fan of The Ward. I don't really like that film, and that's a movie that they wrote during the last film that John Carpenter directed. And it's one of it's personally my pick for John Carpenter's worst film. And I'm not a fan of that movie. I never saw Dark Feed, but I haven't heard good things about it. So I went into this with extremely low expectations, and I actually honestly liked the film. I didn't love it. Didn't love the film. I did find there were some things about it that I didn't care for. Um, but for the most part, for a really low budget movie, this is definitely a low budget film. This is not a movie that I don't, it had to have had a low budget. I mean, IMDb's not telling me how much it cost to make, but it it probably didn't cost maybe $1 million, maybe not even that. Um, as it definitely does look like a low budget film. But the filmmakers use that in their advantage and end up deciding, okay, we can't do that much, so we're just going to end up making this a subtle throwback haunted house horror film where we're going to show you very little. We're not going to show you too much, and we're not going to go too overboard, and we're going to understand our limits, and we're going to work within the limitations that we have. And that's really something that the film does a really good job with. And I also really liked the fact that it was a throwback. They even told me that in the email. Like, it's more like, hey, it's like a throwback haunted house flick to films like The Changeling and The Legend of Hell House. And I'm like, hey, I'll believe it when I see it, kind of thing. And it is. It's not on their level. It's not nearly as good as The Changeling or Legend of Hell House or Robert Wise's The Haunting, but it has a similar feel to it, which I really liked. I think the 4.0 out of 10 on IMDb is way too low. I don't think it's that awful of a film, considering the limitations the filmmakers had to work with. They probably had barely any budget at all to do anything with. It's not a gore fest. It's not a film where it's throwing everything at the screen at you. It takes a while to get going. It's when there are some sort of horror elements, they're right there for a little bit, and that's it. But that's how a lot of these great haunted house flicks are. They don't just throw all this fucking shit at the screen. It's not like the last segment in VHS where it's just hands coming out of walls and shit. It's not like every Paranormal Activity film where it seems like every minute or two there has to be a jump scare. No. I mean, there's a few jump scares in this film, and excuse me, for the most part, they're not really that effective. But jump scares aren't that really that effective when it comes to me anyway. They're just, I'm, there are very few jump scares that get me. But what got me with this film that really creeped me out was its mood and its atmosphere. It had some really great, eerie, creepy mood and atmosphere. And in large part due to its score, which I thought was really good. I really liked the score for this film, especially the main theme, the score by John Cusack and P. Andrew Willis. I really would love to see these guys do more music and do more scores because I really love the main theme that they did for this film. It's a haunting score. It's a throwback score to scores like from Graveyard Shift where you hear a choir in the background. It's a haunting choir. It's an actual memorable horror score that was a nice thing to hear because I can't really think of any horror films lately that have memorable horror scores. I liked it. It was like a creepy choir, and I liked the tune. It went something like this. It was oh oh. I really liked that. It was like do 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 do. And there was other the other pieces of music, There are other pieces of music, not pizzas that were pretty solid as well. I mean, there were some other pieces of music that was just there to create a mood. It was just mood music, but it did a good job doing that. But there's other actual bits of the score that are actually memorable and good. I really liked that main theme. That stood out right off the bat. Like as soon as I heard that, like bam, I was like, well, I really like that. And that was nice to see in a horror film to have a score that I actually remember and actually really like. It's not just a bunch of music stings, and that's about it. The Collector and those films have some really good scores too, but for the most part, there really hasn't been very many horror films with really memorable tunes in them, memorable scores. I thought this is one of the rare instances. I also thought the old school approach, the approach of, okay, we don't have that much of a budget, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna keep a lot of things in the shadows. We're gonna let your imagination run wild. We're gonna let your imagination create the terror that's lurking behind the shower curtain and the terror that's lurking in the shadows. I really like that. That was really refreshing for me to see, considering that most horror films lately, especially that deal with the haunted house, are a bunch of boo scares and gore. So it was nice to see that it wasn't doing that. I mean, there was some gore, but it wasn't anything that was over the top. The film understood that, okay, we're going with a certain tone, and we're not going to all of a sudden have a random scene where it's just like gore galore and just blood spraying all over the place, just for the sake of having gore in the film. I like that. I love gore. I love gore as much as the next guy, but this isn't a film that really felt like it needed to be gory. I mean, there was blood in this, but it wasn't particularly super bloody, and it didn't need to be, because that's not the point of the film. It's not a slasher film. I don't like it when movies are like trying to be like a straight up, straightforward, subtle haunted house flick, and then all of a sudden it just does a 180 and it's a slasher movie, and then it goes back to being a straightforward, subtle haunted house flick. I don't like that. I really don't like it when films shift in tone that abruptly. And this film didn't do that. It had an opportunity, it could have done that, but it didn't do it, and I gotta give the filmmakers, the Rasmussen brothers, big credit for that, because I'm glad they didn't do that, because then I would have been like, oh, come on, really? They kind of did at the end, which, that's one part of the film I don't really like, but I'll get into that soon enough. But anyway, I just wanted to say right off the bat to the Rasmussen brothers, I really like the fact that you decided, yeah, we're going to make an old-fashioned haunted house flick. We're not going to it's going to be a slow burn, and yeah, we're going to have a little bit of possession angle with the actress with the wife in the film, but we're not going to drag it out forever like something like Honeymoon did, and we're not going to make it ridiculous. We're going to make it subtle, like majority of the film is. Some of the most effective scares in this film are sequences like there's a scene where the girl's in her bathroom, and then it cuts, she leaves, and then you zoom in on the shower curtain, and you see the shadow behind the shower curtain. That's the kind of stuff that's more effective to me in terms of scares, because I don't know what the shadow is. It could be anything. My mind can create whatever sort of terror it wants. It'll be more scary than anything that the filmmaker or the writer can come up with. I'm glad it's not a monster. I'm glad I don't know what's behind the shower curtain. Sequences where she goes in and does the laundry and she's washing these old clothes and she goes and puts her hand in the washer and a hand grabs her back. That kind of stuff. There's a nice little nod to the Changeling where you see like a chair and it moves by itself, but it's not a total rip-off of the Changeling because it just moves a little bit. It doesn't start rolling towards her. There's even sequences where you see the ghosts in the film, and they look like something you would see out of, for example, Let's Scare Jessica to Death, or The Beyond, or Lucio Fulci's The Beyond, especially Lucio Fulci's The Beyond. The look of these ghosts I really liked, especially one of the main ones you keep seeing. She's got these wide eyes, much like the character in The Beyond. That's, people really know that image. It's an iconic horror image for people who've seen that film. The woman Catriona McCall with the, I think it's Catriona McCall with the white eyes. I could be wrong. I think it could be a different actress, but the point still stands. The actress with the white eyes is something that's very memorable, and it's a very striking image. And I like the fact that he kind of borrows that a little bit here. The Rasmussen brothers borrow that, but they don't blatantly rip it off. They still make it their own. So yeah, and I thought their direction for the most part was there. It was alright. There were some moments where it was a little bit too much extreme close-ups for my taste, a little bit of too much soft focus, but for the most part, they did a good job mixing things up. It didn't feel static. It didn't feel like it was just a camera sitting there and then they just moved it a little bit. They definitely felt it had a flow to it, and I definitely did appreciate that. It shows that these filmmakers have potential, and I'd actually like to see these guys do a film with a bigger budget, because you can tell, yeah, they did a lot of up-extreme close-ups to try to create this mood and then an atmosphere and then also a lot of soft focus, but they did it because, well, they probably only had a digital camera to work with. They don't have some big, really fancy camera. They don't have like a, the cameras where you can do all these different 360-degree angles and all this other crazy stuff, because they don't have the budget for it. So they don't have like a harness for the camera. When you see those big major studio films where the guys sit in this chair and the camera moves up and down and around and every which way but loose, they didn't really have something like that to their exposure, to their, not really exposure, but to their disposal, so to speak. They didn't have something like that to work with. So for what they had to work with, I've seen worse directing. I definitely have. They did a good job showing any sequence that had to deal with the character reading something. They did a good job showing the paper, whatever, the manuscript or whatever they're reading. They did a good job showing it on the screen in a way that's engaging to the audience. They did a good job with the sequences where they're just trying to show you quick flash cuts of something that's, eerie and scary and spooky. And they did a good job creating an atmosphere and a mood and making you unsettling the viewer with these different angles and stuff. And I gotta give them credit for that. I really do. I think the editing might be more of a problem than really the Rasmussen director, the Rasmussen brothers, Michael and Sean Rasmussen's. If I'm saying your guy's name wrong, I apologize. But Michael and Sean Rasmussen's directing, I definitely think that's fine. The editing was also by Michael Rasmussen and Sean Hester, so I don't know who it was, but the editing, it's there at points, but other times it's a little bit too TV movie-ish for my taste, a little bit too many fade-outs and fade-ins. But I've definitely seen worse in that regard as well. Cinematography is there. Once again, they don't really have that much to work with here in terms of cinematography. But they did a good job using their location. I really like the shots where they show the inside the walls of the house, which they did a great job shooting those sequences. And I always love movies that do that anyway. I know there's a sequence in the Black Christmas remake that handles that, does something with that, which one of the few things about that film I really liked. People Under the Stairs, one of the best films that deals with that sort of stuff, where you're hiding behind the walls of the house, trying to find your way out, and around like a maze. The Toolbox Murders remake, I thought they did a good job with that as well. And this film did a solid job too as well. I think that's always something that's going to be creepy, and that's always something that's going to be effective in a horror film, is sequences that happen with a character within the walls of their own house. I always think that's effective because you know, we don't know what's behind there. We rarely ever go there anyway. So it's like going into the unknown, going into another world, the world within the world that we know, but we still don't know this particular world because we don't go behind, you know, we don't hide behind the walls of our house. We don't check in, see what's behind there all the time. So I thought that was, you know, I was like seeing sequences like that. The film also had a feel in certain sequences where it felt like it was kind of like a survival, not really a survival horror game, but kind of like a horror video game, where you're playing this character and they're discovering all these clues and they're trying to discover what's going on about what's the mystery behind this house. So, and I thought the screenplay by once again the Rasmussen, Michael and Sean Rasmussen also wrote the film. I thought it was a huge step up from something like The Ward, and I thought it actually was a really engaging screenplay for what it was. I didn't think it was full of cliches. I didn't think it was entirely predictable. I thought the way that they handled things were really well done. I thought the different beats of the story came in at the right moments. The way everything unraveled was in a way I didn't expect. I'm going to say spoilers right off the bat right here. I'm just going to say spoilers. But I really want to mention this particular part of the story uh, in this review. And the particular part of the story is a really unexpected, cool twist in the plot where the male lead, which I'll get into a little bit of talk about the actors later after I get done talking about this sequence. The male lead, Michael Reed, played by, Dan. The character's name is Dan, played by Michael Reed. So he goes up in the attic because there was a leak. There's water leaking from the attic into a bedroom, into a room. So he ends up going to the attic to check it out. And what he discovers up there is something I never expected. So he goes up there and he sees all of this video equipment, like these TV monitors and like VCRs and all these VHS tapes. I was like, what the fuck? It really took me for a loop. And that automatically, I'm really now hooked into this story. I'm like, what the hell is all this? Where did all this video equipment come from? Why is it here? What's all these VHS tapes? I would say the Rasmussen brothers did a hell of a better job dealing with the VHS tapes than the VHS films did, because it's not completely pointless like it was in those movies. Here it has a point to it. It makes somewhat sense. Don't explain it as well as they can, but there's enough there where you're like, okay, I get why they're there. They're there actually to record the inhabitants of the house. Of course, they're ghosts, but everything's recorded. There's still cameras that are live in the house, which I thought was pretty interesting development as well. And they're there to record these ghosts. I guess for what reason is not really confirmed. Is it just for proof that the place is haunted? Or just for some guy's sick, twisted fun? That's not really explained very well, and that's one aspect of this plot that, could be delved into a little bit more, but I still like the effort regardless. It's a good try to really, and it's a good enough effort in order to keep you engaged in the film with different twists in the story. And I think they did a good job incorporating, because it takes place in New England, so they did a good job incorporating this, the whole witch folklore aspect of the story. So yeah, I think the Rasmussen brothers did a solid job directing. Nothing spectacular, but for what they had to work with, it was good enough. The writing was really solid, actually a pretty engaging story that kept me interested and didn't spend too long with the whole possession angle. And they had some fun lines of dialogue not a lot. There could have been a little bit more, but that's not the type of film that this is. I mean, there's some fun stuff, like Dan is talking to his wife after she's been possessed and something's wrong with her, and he's like, what? Would you beat our dog? It's like, no, I didn't beat our dog. I was just joking. Or then I really like this scene where he's like, were you burning something in the kitchen upstairs earlier? Yeah, I was burning some incense. Don't do that. That shit stinks. Smells like shit. I love that. It's like, don't do that. It smells like shit. I love how straightforward he was. I love that. There's a scene where she scares him in like a jump scare moment, and he's like, Jesus! What the hell? I like that. So there's a little bit, of that sort of aspect that I like about movies like this. A little bit of fun dialogue. Could add a little bit more, but what's there is all right. It's nothing spectacular or super memorable, but it added some personality to the character. Much needed personality to the character of Dan, because throughout the whole majority of the film, he's a pretty boring, bland character. But as it goes on, it gets a little bit more interesting once he realizes that his wife is not who she, his wife isn't herself. And once he realizes that, then he lets loose a little bit and takes a stick out of his ass, and is definitely a little bit more of a likable character. So now speaking of characters, we go into the cast and crew. You get the majority of the cast. It consists of Elise Couture, plays Jessica, who I honestly thought she did a really solid job performance-wise. From the beginning, it was kind of irritating because she's this really overly perky character, but after a while, I really warmed up to her, because she was infinitely times more interesting to watch than Dan, who was like the complete opposite. So it's one of those aspects of like opposites attract, but it doesn't really work because the guy just comes across as like a really bland Crispin Glover. Like, Crispin Glover is a crazy, weird guy, but take away that aspect of him, and you got this guy. You got Dan. At least the character, the way he's portrayed in at least the first half of the film, played by Michael Reed. He also reminds me a lot of Steven Weber, especially from the Shining miniseries. He's got the long hair and everything and the similar look. He doesn't end up killing anybody with a croquet mallet, though, which is good. We don't really need that. But anyway, so I did like the actress, though, Couture, when she was being animated. I warmed up to it because, hey, she's perky, but she's got a personality, and hey, it's like she embodied innocence in a sense. And then, of course, innocence gets corrupted when she goes and looks around somewhere, ends up getting, drops something, looks behind the house, gets pricked by something, and then, of course, this is the scene where she goes in behind the walls of the house and then meets these ghosts, and then that's it. She's possessed, and that's pretty much the rest of the film. Just focuses on her off and on, showing her not being herself. And I actually thought the actress did a great job playing both roles. She did a great job being this perky, fun, upbeat character, and then did a great job taking her character had a total personality shift and was just, because she's possessed, so she's just completely monotone and just really eerie, like she's just dead-eyed. And that's the point, because her spirit, her soul, is not there anymore. It's replaced by something else. So I like that. And there was a few other actors and actresses, but they were just pretty much extras, really. Like, there was these people who were hanging out in the woods, and they tried to break into the house, and then they get killed off. And they get killed off for pretty not very imaginative or very amazing ways, but the film's not trying to be gore fest, so I was fine with that, because that's not the point of the movie. It was just, but at the same time, it's like we didn't really need them to come into the house either and get killed off. It just felt kind of unnecessary. Felt it was just there to whet somebody's appetite for blood and carnage, but then it doesn't really go with the gore, so then it doesn't really even appeal to them. So it's just, it wasn't really necessary to show the possessed Jessica. I think it's possessed character Jessica going around killing these random intruder guys. There's a girl too, but it really wasn't necessary. But yeah, where the film is most effective is early on, where it's a slow burn, but it shows you, the type of stuff where doors close by themselves. You hear the house creak. Jessica gets a phone call, and there's a voice on the other end, and it's coming from inside the house type thing, and so that's where the film is the most effective in terms of its scares. Because then as it goes down, and later in the film, it's more of the possessed chick sort of angle, or showing a little bit of the jump scares of the ghosts. Yeah. But there's one particular scare that really got me. It really got me. There's a couple of them. There's a quick little dream sequence that Dan has where he's dreaming and he sees his wife Jessica. She's breastfeeding some baby, and then he finds out the baby is just is a skeleton. And the way that it was shot, and the way it was handled was very surreal and nightmarish, and I thought it did a good job really making me go like, what the fuck? This is like some just David Lynch type crazy shit, like some out of Eraserhead. And then the most effective one, though, that really made me cringe and really made me go like, ooh, was this another really quick dream sequence where Dan's dreaming, and then or maybe you think it's a dream sequence, could be, could not be. This is a moment where reality starts to blur, and the line between reality and fantasy starts to blur here, and he's just laying down in his bed, and then his wife, his possessed wife, comes in and like spits like a fucking slimy loogie in his ear. And I was just like, oh god, that's just gross. Like that was really effective because it was so gross and unsettling. I can't even think of a movie that has a sequence like that. I mean, there's similar stuff, like in Deadly Blessing, where a spider falls in Sharon Stone's mouth. But this is definitely something that makes you squirm, like it makes your stomach churn. It's just like you're like, ew. It's just like, and then the sound editing is really good after that sequence because then it starts playing the sound of ears ringing, which actually is really effective in that sequence. They continue to do that later on. And then the score even really intensifies in the climax when Dan's getting chased around by his possessed wife and he sees all of these children, the inhabitants of the house, these ghost children. And he sees all of them, and then it's actually a really good score that really gets your heart pounding. Where the film falters, especially, is its ending. I mean, it builds up well with the whole aspect of revealing all the different clues that we've been seeing throughout the film. And it does leave some things unanswered, questions unanswered, which was I actually like that it didn't answer all the questions, especially when it comes to the past of the house and who's possessing her and why. I mean, I'm glad it just said, no, we're not going into that. We're gonna let you try to, come up with something yourself. Make up your own mind, so to speak. I didn't mind that because, it didn't really need to do that. Sometimes it's scarier when you don't know what it is that's possessing you and you don't know why it's doing that. I mean, there's a lot of films haunted house films that explain it and just end up fucking up the movie. Like the Haunting remake or I'm trying to think of another one that kind of tried to do, or the Amityville Horror remake, for instance. I mean, they had to explain what it was. It was just, they didn't really need to do that. It takes away the mystique. It takes away what makes the haunted house concept so scary. But anyway, because then it makes you like feel for whoever's haunting the house or whatever. Or explains what happened. Like if it was a witch that was tried wrongly and wants revenge, and then it's just, so it's a whole different clusterfuck. So I'm glad it didn't do that. But where it suffers is it's setting itself up for a good ending, which makes this a film that can be watched over and over again, in my personal opinion. Where Dan he's trapped by his possessed wife, who looks a lot like Carly Rae Jepsen. I'll just say right off the bat, this actress, and I mean not right off the bat because this is like what 20-something minutes in, almost 30 minutes in the review. It just came out. It just popped in there. I'm just gonna say this. Elise Couture is like it's almost like they're twins. Carly Rae Jepsen, the singer who sang that song "Call Me Maybe," that really popular song they used to hear on the radio all the time. But she looks a lot like her. So anyway, possessed Carly Rae, Elise Couture character, Jessica. She's got Dan strapped into this birthing chair, this creepy chair we saw earlier move by itself. And she ends up bloodletting him, trying to get the evil out of him. Because I guess whatever spirits are possessing her still thinks it's in the medieval times. The time of the witch hunts and the Salem witch trials and all of that. And he manages though to escape and like headbutt her and then like get the fuck away from her and like beat the shit out of her with a flashlight and get out of the way, and he escapes through the inside, through, behind the walls of the house, and then I'm like, is he gonna make it? Is he gonna get away and then like burn the house down or some shit? And like, no, I didn't go that route. It goes the typical route where he gets to a point where he can't go any further, and she stabs him. I like the fact when the blood sprayed on the screen, and then that became a transition, but it's just like, really. And then the ending's pretty much, oh, she's fine now, and she's pregnant, and then like there's a new couple who comes in, and they're gonna stay with her, and it's like, stay in the possessed room, ha ha, it's great, you're gonna love it. Zoom in on her face, and then you see a little bit of her eyes change, end credits. So I'm like, okay, it's not as bad as an ending, for example, like At the Devil's Door, just fucking awful and atrocious and insulting to your intelligence. Here it's like, okay, alright, it's setting itself up probably for sequel never happen, or it's the horror never dies type thing, and the film did feel like it had this overwhelming sense of dread about it anyway, so it's not like it didn't necessarily earn an ending like that. It's just, for me personally, I just don't prefer endings like that. There's very rare instances where you have a film that has an ending like that, and I don't mind. Like A Nightmare on Elm Street, the 1984 original, or John Carpenter's The Thing, with these bleak endings. But for the most part, it just hurts the film because it doesn't make it a film I want to watch over and over again. It's not a film I really would want to watch again because I know how it ends. And it's just like nobody lives, or nobody I care about. Evil wins. There we go. That's it. I mean, good is fucked, and good night. So that's just, but I know a lot of people like that when they're horror films. I'm just the type of guy who really likes it when somebody survives, somebody gets away. It's why I like The Conjuring a lot. But I still like the film alright. I thought it was a decent film. If I would say anything, it'd probably be a time waster for me. It's probably a film I don't know if I'd watch again, considering the ending and considering that kind of stuff. But it was a lot better than I thought it was going to be. And I like the fact that it was, like I said, an old school throwback to the haunted house flicks of old, and did a solid job with that, showing these subtle scares, which I always like that kind of stuff. I really enjoy that type of horror film. And for the most part, it did a good job, despite its low budget, doing that kind of horror film. And the performances, for the most part, were all right. I mean, Dan didn't have much to work with early on because his character was pretty much just a stick in the mud. And then once things were starting to go weird, then he started to become a little bit more of a likable character when she discovers, like, what the fuck is going on in the attic with all the videotapes and the video monitors and stuff. But, and it has its fair share of creepy scenes, good atmosphere, good mood, good score, especially the main theme, and direction is there. The writing is pretty solid for the most part. Could flesh out a few elements. I would have liked a different ending, but hey, that's just me personally. But yeah, I like the film all right. Like I said, I said it's a time which I actually liked it more than that. I mean, I think I'm being a little bit too hard on the film in that regard because it did keep me engaged. It did keep me interested. It did have its fair share of good shots. I mean, there's a shot where the girl, Jessica, the actress Elise Couture, she's in the bathtub, and she ends up just submerging herself all the way underwater. And the way that it was shot, I liked. It reminded me of something like out of What Lies Beneath. It was just a really well shot sequence. So yeah, there was more fair. It kept me interested. It kept me engaged. It creeped me out a little bit. It definitely was it tingled my spine a bit. It didn't tingle it a lot, but it tingled it a little bit, a lot more than I thought it would. And I didn't mind the plot and the story. And yeah, would I recommend the film? If you're a fan of these throwback style old school haunted house flicks, yeah, I'd recommend at least one watch. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised even if you are a fan of that type of film, it ends up not being your cup of tea because it is kind of a slow pace and there's not a lot that happens. So I can see why people find this boring. But if you can get into the slow burn, if you can get into the concept of the film, you can get into the characters a little bit, then you can enjoy yourself for the most part with the proceedings. The film doesn't really use a lot of CGI, which is something I really liked as well. There's a little bit of CGI with these moths that keep showing up. Whenever like some sort of haunted house, some kind of haunting occurring in the house. It's typical sort of CGI you use when you have to superimpose video on like a prop. But for the most part, it did almost everything it could practical, which I did appreciate. I mean, maybe a little bit of the ghost effects were CGI, but for the most part, it was practical. But yeah, it was a lot better than I thought it would be. So I really don't know what to say about The Inhabitants, except it was rated out of 5 stars. I give it, like I said, I liked it, but I didn't love it. So I'd probably give it 3.5. I gave it 3.5 out of 5. Above average film. It absolutely surprised me in a lot of different ways. I thought it was going to be terrible, and it really wasn't. I'd be lying if I said it was. And it's not just because these guys sent me the film and wanted me to review it, and I want to make sure that they're not mad at me. You know me personally. I will be honest with anything. No matter if somebody sent me something to review, or no matter if somebody paid me to review something, I'm going to be honest no matter what. And honestly, I liked the film all right. It was a decent, above average haunted house flick. Could have had a better ending, in my opinion, but maybe a little bit more going on, maybe a little bit tighter pace, but for the most part, could do a lot worse. So, anyway, thank you for watching my review of The Inhabitants, and I will see you guys later. See ya.